special guest is Marylin Pandit, and I'll let Marylin introduce herself in a moment. And she's going to be talking on the topic of Jupyter Notebooks. And I have to say, or Jupyter Notebooks and Python, I have to say I don't know a lot about this topic, but I have heard the terms used before. I know a bit about Python, but really this is going to be a discovery session for me and hopefully for many of you as well. And as we normally do, we will take questions. I haven't checked with you, Marylin. Would you like to wait for the end for questions? Would you like to run to your for your presentation and then we'll take questions, or how would you like to do that?
Yeah, so we'll take questions at the end because
okay.
I do have another former colleague of mine as well who will be joining as a Q&A panel.
Okay, all right, good. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. Please publish them to everyone so everyone else can see everyone else's questions. But we will sit on those questions until the end, and then Marylin and your colleague, his name was, or her name, Kavi. Okay.
His name, yeah.
Yeah. So he'll give us a hand. So with that, welcome, Marylin, and over to you. And yeah, if you'd like to share your screen when you're ready, we'd be good to go.
Yeah, sure. Matt, for that wonderful note. And I just wanted to introduce myself. Like you must have seen on the invite that I have been working with MOQ Digital for a while, and I just finished with MOQ Digital on Friday. And I just started working for Insight like 2 days ago. So I'm just getting my head around, the organization and everything. But mainly, I've been in BI and data analytics for a while now, and I also got my certification in Azure, so which makes me a data engineer. And my topic for today, as you know, is the Power BI integration with Python. And can you guys let me know if you can see this particular bar, because then I want to hide it.
We can, no, we can't see the bar along the top. It's already automatically hidden, Marylin,
okay,
so you're
cool.
good.
Awesome. So yeah, the topic for today is Power BI integration with Python. And I'm really excited to present this. And I hope that you guys are excited as well, because Power BI and Python are the two technologies that have been spoken about the most in the past, like 4 to 5 years. Like every second person will ask you, do you know Python? Do you know Python? And before I start this presentation, I just want to say that you don't need to have a programming background to know Python. Like anybody can start learning Python. I mean, luckily for me, I had that background, but and I learned Python last year just online. And so, while you guys are in lockdown, you can take advantage of that. And there are many online portals that will that have this have Python as the training course. So as I said, that I started working for Insight. My company is actually also hiring. So just to tell you about Insight, a little bit about Insight. It is a Fortune 500 company. It is a global organization which exists in 21 countries with a revenue of $9 billion. And they have their values as hunger, heart, and harmony. It's also certified as a great place to work in many countries. And just this year, Insight actually got Microsoft Partner of the Year globally. So, these are some of the things that I know about Insight, and I know that I just joined like 2 days ago. But within these 2 days, I can say that I've met some really talented people. So if this looks like an organization that you want to work for, please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn, and I can actually refer you. So I want to begin with a fun fact today. Okay. So did you know that Python is actually 30 years old? As in, this language was invented in 1991. And considering that it's such an old language, I feel really sad about the fact that it was not introduced in my university syllabus when I graduated in 2008. But luckily for the people these days, many universities are also having Python in their syllabus, which is a good thing. So Python is such an old programming language, and why suddenly there is this burst of like Python and its popularity. And that's what we are going to look at today, like as in throughout the presentation, as in what is Python? Why is Python so powerful? Like, what is it about Python that makes it so powerful? What is Jupyter Notebook? Okay, and then as Matt mentioned, he's very keen to learn about Jupyter Notebooks, and I'm guessing that all of you have heard about Jupyter Notebook. I'm assuming that some of you have already used Python and already used Jupyter Notebook, but I'm also going to show a couple of demos, and I believe as a presenter that the demo is the star of the show. So it's not me, but it's the demo, and I'm going to show you like 3 stars today. So one is how you embed Python into Power BI. And the next is how do you embed Power BI into Jupyter Notebooks. And lastly, I'm going to show you how one of the use cases where Python is more effective than Power BI. Now, this presentation is not about who's better, like is Power BI better or Python is better. It's not about that. It's about how these tools work together and more effectively. And lastly, we'll take question and answers with one of my colleagues from my former company, MOQ Digital. I hope he's there on the call. I hope he has been able to join. But yeah, so let's get started. Okay, thanks. So let's get started. So what is Python? Python is an object-oriented language, and it's a high-level language. It also is very intuitive, which makes it very easy to use. Like you're very familiar with the commands. You know, it's very like in plain English, sort of. This language is compiled, but it's not compiled, but it is interpreted. Now, for those of you who don't know the difference between the two, it's like if you take Visual Studio or SQL Server as a language. So as you're writing the code, it will look at the syntax, it will show you syntactical errors. And, you know, sometimes, especially in Visual Studio, you need to compile the code to, for example, C#, you need to compile it and then run it. But with Python, it just gets interpreted and you'll see all the errors at runtime. Okay. Python is also an open source language, which makes it free and you know, usable and distributable. What that means is that you don't have to pay a license to buy Python. You can just go and download it and start using it. And this is also a very economic solution because you can go to your manager in your company and say that, hey, this is a language where the company has $0 investment and, you know, it is free to use. So that's again a good advantage of Python. And for those of you who don't know what an open source language is, open source language is more like, you know, it's just freely available. The code is available on GitHub and, you know, on python.org. And not just that, you can also contribute to the code. You know, there are hundreds of libraries available for you to use. But if you end up writing a library yourself, you can actually contribute to it. So that's what the concept of open source is. And one more thing I want to add is that Python is not owned by anybody. It's not owned by Microsoft or Oracle or Salesforce. It's just free. Okay, so that's a good advantage commercially. Now, why is Python so powerful? Like, what is it about Python that, you know, makes it so powerful? Like I said, it is easy to use, and there are hundreds of libraries available. It's a general purpose language, which means that it's not specifically with any specific purpose. Okay, there are different flavors of Python, like this C Python, there's J Python. Python can be embedded like in a web browser. In you know, these days it can be embedded in Azure. Today we'll see that it's going to get embedded in Power BI. So it doesn't have, it's very platform agnostic. I think that's the word for it. It's also very versatile, flexible, and efficient. I mean, my colleague Kavi and I were working a couple of weeks ago actually, on we were trying to find a solution as to how Python can read an XML file. And we literally found 3 libraries which can do the same thing. So you can see the variety in Python, that Python is very versatile, flexible, and efficient. And one of the good things about Python is that it can process hundreds of rows of thousands of rows of data with no additional coding. As in, with very little code, you can achieve a lot. And that's why that's the whole power of Python, because of its level of abstraction. Again, abstraction is an object-oriented concept, but for those of you who don't know what abstraction is, it is a concept where you hide all the unnecessary excessive coding and give the user or the programmer only uh, uh, high level language where they can just use the function, and they don't have to do extra coding. But when you do your Python course, and if you plan to do it, I think they will explain to you all these concepts. And I'm not going to go into detail with those concepts. So I'll just move on to the next slide, where Python is so powerful, and which is why it became very popular amongst people. So like I said, Python is a very old language, but then when people in the data analytics space, like your data scientists and all, they started using statisticians. Actually, many statisticians and all started using Python, and suddenly, it became very popular because it's a very low effort in Python. And all these big technical giants like Microsoft and Amazon and Google, Tableau, all these companies, they took notice of it, and they said, hey, this language is so powerful, it's getting very, very popular. So let us, build the capability to embed Python into it. Like, these companies wanted to leverage Python's popularity into their platforms, and which is why today you can embed Python in, like, Azure, Power BI, Tableau, Google, all these platforms. And Python is being considered as the key machine learning language for the future. Now, today, the scope of machine learning is out of scope for today's presentation, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So, moving on, I'm just going to quickly show you how to. Installation of Python is very easy. All you need to do is, go to python.org and download Python for Windows or Mac or whatever that you guys are using. Now, I'm not going to show you how to install the software because I trust that you know how to install a software. But what I will show you is what to do after the installation. Okay, so one of the most important steps is to check the environment variables. And these need to be set up correctly, because if it's not, then your Python won't work very effectively. So I'll just quickly show you the environment variables. You need to go to the start button and just type environment variables. And what you'll see over here is your path. And just click edit. Don't change anything, but just make sure that you copy it, because this path is really important. And once you copy it, go to your Explorer and paste it. Okay, so just make sure that it exists and it's all good. One thing to notice is that this app data folder is usually hidden, app data or local. Just make sure that in your Windows Explorer, you view all hidden folders, otherwise you won't be able to locate it. Okay, and once you get here, the next step to do is to install pip. Okay, and I'll show you how to do that. Pip is the collection of libraries that Python has by default. Okay, without pip, you will miss a lot of libraries. So it is very important to install pip. And I'm going to copy this command. So there are two commands basically. One is to install and the other is to upgrade. Now, because I have already installed it, I'm just going to try and upgrade it. And so in your Internet Explorer, one of the easiest ways is to just type CMD. in the path that you had pasted in your Windows Explorer, and it will open the command prompt for you, where you can paste your command. Now, what this is telling me is that this requirement is already satisfied. Now, what that means is that I already.
Can I ask everyone to put yourself on mute, please, to avoid any background noise? Matt, can you mute everyone?
Yeah, thanks, Iman. So this is telling me that this requirement is already satisfied. What that means is that I already have the latest version of all the packages. Okay. Now, suppose if Python had released something this morning, my packages would have got updated straight away. So that's how you install pip. It's an important step. The next step is to install any library. Okay. This is a very generic kind of a syntax, which is very easy to use. So Python -m pip install, and just put the library name. So there are a couple of libraries which are very common in Python, like pandas, numpy, etc. So you will, depending on what you're trying to do with your Python code, you will need to install the relevant library if it doesn't exist. So yeah, I mean, it's quite easy to use, as you can see. Now, once you have all this installation in place, where do you do your Python coding? So for Python, there are lots of IDEs that are available. Okay, and these are the most common ones that I can see. But these are not the only ones. There are many others that exist out there in the market. And you can use whatever you're comfortable with. But today we're going to look at Jupyter Notebook because Microsoft decided to embed Power BI within Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so the different IDEs are Jupyter Notebook, Visual Studio Code, Python, Shell, and Python command prompt. Okay, I think these two come along once you install Python. And Visual Studio Code is obviously, I'm sure you're familiar with this. You need to install it. And Jupyter Notebook, I'll show you how to install it. Again, it's very easy. So what exactly is the Jupyter Notebook? You know, you must have heard this because it's become a buzzword. You know, Jupyter Notebook is just like Python. It is an open source web application. Okay, once you install Jupyter Notebook, again, the syntax is very similar to what we've been using for so long. You know, you've got Python -m pip install Jupyter Notebook. So once you install that, what Jupyter Notebook does is, and when you open it, it will open a browser for you and a local instance of the browser for you, which means regardless of whether you're connected to the internet or not, Jupyter Notebook can run. So imagine if you're far away in a remote location where internet doesn't work, but still you can still do your coding with Jupyter Notebook. So let's look at what does the Jupyter Notebook exactly look like. So I'm going to try and open Jupyter Notebook for you. I'm going to go back to my command prompt and I'm just going to write. So remember to install the Jupyter Notebook first, and then once it gets installed, just write Jupyter Notebook. And depending on the directory where you have opened it, it's going to show you everything that is listed within that directory. Okay, so, and that is a good thing. One of the good things that I like about this is that you can upload any file over here. So suppose if I wanted to do coding on top of a data file directly within Jupyter Notebook, you can upload that file straight away over here in this folder. Okay, by doing this, you don't have to refer to the full path of the file, like, you know, C drive, my documents, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to refer to the whole path in your code. You can just refer to the file name straight away. So that's a good thing. Now, if you want to start coding, you know, what you need to do is go to new and open Python 3. Okay, this is the IDE where you can do your coding, and this particular thing rectangle over here is called as a cell. Okay, make sure that code is selected over here, because within these cells you can do other things as well. You can do some commentary and put some headings and all of that, but you need to make sure that code is selected. And I'm just going to write like a very basic hello world statement, which is the classic one where we want to check if something is working or not, and just run it. Okay, and it will print hello world. Very simple.
Very simple.
Okay, so the next bit is, what is the power? Sorry, I'm going to show you the power of Python in one line of code. And as you can see that Python is the one superpower that everybody wants in 2021. So Python is now, these days, it's called the superpower. So let's see how we can demonstrate that in one line of code. So to add a new cell, just click on this plus sign over here, and it'll add a new cell. Now, I know a lot of programming languages, and I'm sure some of you also know a lot of programming languages. But the thing about the statement that completely blew my mind was the fact that the print function over here is capable of accepting anything other than text. So usually in programming languages like C# and Java and all those languages, print function accepts like text values or values that are supposed to be printed. But in this particular statement, as you can see, it is accepting a Boolean. Okay, it is accepting a Boolean. It is performing, and if I run the statement, you can see that it performed the OR operation within the print function. OR operation is a logical operation, and I'm sure you guys know about that. And the third thing that it did was it printed the output of that function, of that operation. Now, the difference between this one and this one is like, in this one, it is accepting the standard text message. It is printing whatever you're asking it to print. But in this one, it is actually doing a logical operation within the print function. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I have not seen any other programming language do that. And if you wanted to AND operation also, Python can do that as well. Okay. So this one statement completely blew my mind, and I was so impressed by Python. So moving on to our demo section. Now I'm going to show you how we can embed Python in Power BI. And this is the part that I know that everyone has been waiting for. So let's get to the Power BI file. So I have with me my Power BI file, and I have actually imported a file, a data set from Google. I just downloaded some data set from sales data from Google. I've imported that. I'm sure you know how to do that, so I'm not going to show you. But once you do that, and before you start using any of the Python visuals, once you install Python, I think Python visuals should be visible here. But if it's not, then you need to go and check your settings in Power BI. You need to go to File, go to Options and Settings, Options, and in Python scripting. So remember the path that I asked you to check in your environment variables. This is the same path, okay? And just make sure that this path reflects over here. Otherwise, Python visual will not function properly, or Python code will not function properly in your Power BI. Okay, so once that is done, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a Python visual here, and it'll ask you to enable it, which you need to enable. And once you have your Python visual here, one of the good things that it asks us to do is it asks us to drag drop. Okay, so whatever values that you want to plot, okay, I want to plot, suppose quantity, and against country, just like your normal visuals, like what you've been doing so far with your visuals. It starts off exactly that. So, they've kind of tried to keep it user friendly, which is a good thing. Once you do that, you'll see that something pops up over here, which is called as the Python script editor. And in this case, what you can see here is Power BI has written 2 lines of code for you, but these 2 lines of code are important because in the Python terminology, a data set is actually called a data frame, and in the Power BI terminology, we call data set as data set. So Power BI is doing that semantic translation for us, so we don't get confused, and that's a good thing. And Python is also dropping the duplicates. Okay, nobody wants wrong results, so it's always good to drop, duplicates. And what it's telling us to do specifically is that paste your code here. Okay, now I'm going to take some code. I have some code with me, but it's a very simple code. As you can see, I just have like 3 lines of code, and I'll explain this to you. Before you start coding anything in Python, you need to import the relevant libraries. The Matplotlib library basically is a library without which you cannot plot any graph in any platform. So even if I was trying to plot this graph in Jupyter Notebook, I would still have to import this library. And this library here is a very interesting library because it has different kind of visuals, which you will see at the end of the demo. And these visuals are quite unique because they're not available in your custom visuals or Power BI visual and that marketplace. So it's a very different kind of a visual, and that visual basically is your Violin Plot. Okay, and you can see the syntax is extremely simple. What is my x-axis? What is my y-axis? And what data set should I plot? Okay, very simple. And plt.show is your command where you want to display the graph. Okay, just 4 lines of code, and within these 4 lines, you can at least, if you're a starter with Python, you can get that confidence that, hey, I can do Python coding. So you just paste this code here or type this code, whatever you prefer. And to run the code, you just click run. And what you can see here is you can see a very different kind of a visual, which you've never seen before. So this is called as the Violin Plot, which is, it's a very different kind of visual. If you want to impress your your business stakeholders with something different and unique, you can go for these sort of visuals. Okay, and the best part is that these filters that I've created work on top of, so I've created a filter for month and for year. Okay, so these visuals work against this thing. Okay, if I select all, or if I select a very, very specific year. So the data within this will keep changing. So, so that's how you embed Python code into your Power BI. And I've also demonstrated how you can get very different visuals that, from the Python libraries into Power BI. So that is the demo. That is the first sort of a demo. And now we'll move on to the next demo where I'm going to show you how you embed Power BI into Jupyter Notebook. Okay. And before you do that, this is a very important library to install. It's called the Power BI client. Now, in this demo, what we are trying to achieve is how can you embed a Power BI report from the Power BI service into Jupyter Notebook. So you need to make sure of a couple of things. First thing, that the report should be deployed to your Power BI service within a group workspace. as in a common workspace that is shared amongst people. Because this demo will not work if you install it in my workspace. You know that place which is called my workspace. It won't work if you install it in just your workspace. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new instance of Jupyter Notebook. Okay, and I've got my cell here. And again, I've got some code written over here. And once again, this is a very easy code. Okay, this hash part is the commentary. You can ignore the commentary. And if you ignore the commentary, it's just like, again, like 5-6 lines of code. I'm going to explain this code to you, which is very simple again. So you import your libraries, you import the relevant functions and libraries, whatever is necessary for this to embed Power BI into Jupyter Notebook. And this is a very interesting function, which is the type of authentication. Okay, in this case, I'm using device authentication because unfortunately, because I've switched organizations, I just finished with my former employer on Friday and I joined my new employer today. I don't have access to the Power BI service. However, I will show you how the report looks like once the code executes. Okay, so this particular code assumes that you're using, that you're going to be using your workplace credentials or your office credentials, the same credentials that you use to kind of log into your Power BI, service. So once I execute this, so this part is common. Okay, even if I was using my work credentials, it would still ask me this question. To sign in, use a web browser to open the page. Okay, and enter this code. I'm just going to click on this and enter the code that it's asking me to. So in this case, if I had my office credentials, I would have used my work credentials, but because I don't have access, I'm going to use my personal ones. Okay, and it's going to ask me, are you trying to sign into Microsoft Azure CLI? Just say continue. And now that this particular device is trusted, okay, because authentication has been done. So we'll move on to the next part of the code, which is your group ID and the report ID. Now, when you open any Power BI report in the Power BI service, you need to take a careful look at the URL, okay? Because that's where you will get your group ID. Group ID means the workspace ID and the report ID from. So these two are basically GUIDs, that is unique identifiers. And you will get these things from the URL of the Power BI service of the report that you're trying to embed. Okay. So I'm just using some, dummy GUIDs over here. Okay. And once you put these two things, the next part of the code is very simple. So this is, again, a function. And in this function, you specify that, okay, please use this group ID, the one that I've specified up here. And please use this report ID, the one that I've specified here. And the type of authentication is the one that we looked at earlier, like this particular device authentication. There is a different type of authentication as well. I think embedded token or something, but unfortunately, it wasn't working very well for me. So I decided to go with this. And lastly, this report command over here is just to display the report. Okay. And like I said, I'm really sorry. I don't have access to any of the workspaces because I've switched organizations. But if we were to execute this code, this is how it would look like. Okay. this is how the Power BI report would look like. And one of the best things is that even when this report is embedded within the Jupyter Notebook, this report is still interactive, which means you can still do your cross filtering, you can still use your slicers and filters, all of that. So, and this is a really nice scenario for people who are just starting to know or getting to know Power BI. In the sense, like I remember this in 2018, I was working for a bank, and back then I didn't know Python, and I was working with a lot of statisticians and economists and all of those, and they were very good with Python. At that time, they didn't know Power BI, but I knew Power BI. So in that sense, we kind of spoke like two different languages, and so if you know any statisticians or data scientists who know Python very well, and if you want to get them to start using Power BI or get them an introduction of, hey, this is how Power BI works. This is a very good scenario where you can get them, just to get them started with Power BI. And also the reverse case, if someone is really good with Power BI and you want them to get started with Python, the previous demo is very ideal for them, where they can start embedding Python into Power BI. So yeah, I mean, this still looks good. And by the way, this update of Jupyter Notebook and Python was announced by Microsoft like very recently, just last month. So yeah, I mean, you can check out the blog as well that Microsoft has posted. So moving on to the third demo, which is a use case where Python is more effective than Power BI. Now, again, I'm not trying to compare the two products, but sometimes we have these things or limitations, and limitations come with every technology. Okay. So what I've done here is I have basically cloned my data set. Okay, I've just created a duplicate data set here. And I'm going to go into transform data. I'm going to go into my cloned one. And, one of the best things about this thing is that you can embed a Python script over here as well. So this is your query editor where you do all your ETL or your transformations and all of that. And you can actually embed Python script here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click on this. And what it asks me to do is to paste my code. And what it's telling me is that data set holds the input for your input data for the script. Okay, which means whatever data set that I cloned, it exists in this one variable. And so that's a good thing. Again, I'm going to go and get my code. Again, this is a very simple code, just 3 lines of code. But if you look at this very carefully, okay, sorry, I'm just going to go back and show you why we are using this Python. So suppose if I wanted to kind of do a particular type of aggregation on my sales data, okay, I'm not saying that Python can't do the aggregation, it can, okay. Suppose if I wanted the median, it will take all of that and give me the median. And I can also convert it into a table, okay? But if I wanted a couple of more aggregations like median, minimum, summation, average, all those things, okay, I would have to keep repeating this operation a couple of times. Wouldn't it be good if I got all those at the same time? Okay, so, and that's what this demo is about, where Python again, comes into play. And this command is very simple. Again, I'm just using the data. Okay, by the way, pandas is a very important library. If you want to manipulate your data, so pandas is, you need to import pandas for that. And all we are trying to do is we're trying to pivot. Okay, and we're just telling Power BI that this is the index that you want to use. This is the value on top of which you need to perform these aggregations. So as you can see that I've specified multiple aggregation functions within the same line of code. Again, like it's one line of code, but 3 operations. How effective is that? So I'm going to just copy this and I'm going to just paste it here. So it will give me a table at the end and which I need to click. But did you see what it ended up doing here? It ended up giving me aggregations, also country-wise. Earlier, what it was doing was it was just giving me one number for the whole data set. But what if I wanted all these aggregations country-wise? And you'll probably tell me that, hey, if we took a visualization if we took any tabular visualization or tablets, we can achieve the same thing. Yes, you can in your main report, you can achieve this. But what if I wanted to perform additional operation on top of this? For example, what if I wanted to take this particular, sorry, I'll just rename this. What if I wanted to take this mean and multiply it by, I don't know, some number? Okay, statisticians keep doing a lot of calculations and data scientists also keep doing a lot of calculations. So if I wanted to multiply this by, 3.14, which is, I think, pi, isn't it? This is pi. So what if I wanted to do that? Okay, in the earlier scenario where we were trying to achieve that, I don't think it was possible. But see, it's now giving me the calculation on top of the aggregates that it calculated, and that to country wise. So now I'm just going to call this like I don't know, my calculation. And after applying some mathematical formula, if somebody wanted to plot this in a graph, then yeah, that's where your value is ready. So yeah, that brings us to the end of the demo. And I'm just going to go back to my slide. Yeah, so that brings us to the end of the demo. And we can now start with question and answers. And once again, I just want to introduce one of my colleagues, former colleague, Kavi Abdul. I've worked with him at MOQ Digital. He's also a part of this question and answer panel. So please feel free to send through the questions. And Matt, will you be reading out those questions to me?
Yeah, so I think Kavi has already answered some of the questions diligently as you were going, so that's all very well. And so it might be good if people would like to just unmute themselves. We'll try and keep a little bit of order and just ask Marylyn any questions directly. And maybe I could just start off since I've so in that last line of code, Marylyn, it said import pandas as PD. What does as PD refer to? Obviously it's Python code, but what does that refer to?
Okay, so let me just open that code.
It said import pandas as PD, I'm assuming.
Marylyn, do you want me to take that one?
So PD is just a variable, right?
Oh, okay. So it's just it's any variable that you choose to assign. Okay, so it's not like a keyword or anything like that. It's just a user selected variable.
Yeah. So I can even rename this as like ABC. I can rename it as anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
I'd like to add on to that, Matt. So what usually industry practice for Pandas, since these are the common libraries like Pandas, Matplotlib, or Seaborn, so they have these certain letters. So it's always better to go with these ones, even though you can rename it. The reason I say that is because whenever you probably try to look for some Python code, you always find everyone using like an industry set practice,
Right.
like PD, or for Seaborn, it would be SNS. and for NumPy to the NP. So it's just like a generic thing. So you're better off using these ones so that in case if you're even copy pasting code from the internet here and there, you always, you don't land into problems.
Very good. Does anyone else have a question? Please unmute yourself. Otherwise, I've got another one. So where can we find some good sample scripts that would be able to use with Power BI? I'm assuming there's some online resources somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, there's in Python, GitHub, I think should be a good place to start. I think in GitHub you'll find them. And what about python.org, where all the libraries are available? Or we've been looking at W3 schools as well, isn't it, Abdul?
Yeah. You can look at W3 schools and others. It's more importantly, we come up with certain use cases like Marylyn was showing. Pivoting is one very important use case. So what exactly we faced, usually during our general data manipulation and query editor, you're not able to pivot on multiple columns on multi-index, but using Python, you can do that kind of stuff. So you can get down to your use case. So like in her use case, it was aggregation, multiple aggregations. Some use cases could be data manipulation where you want to replace a certain column with a caps and small, and then there's a mix of other issues in that text data. And Python could probably do that. So to answer your question, to get the exact script, I mean, there could be Python code and bits and pieces here and there. But if you get done with your problem case, maybe you can just find that code quickly. And the basics are just making sure that your data set, the variable in Python you store it, it's called data set. So you can usually people write df or you can write anything, but you make sure you write a data set because that's what Power BI understands. That's why Marylyn's code on the screen says dataset.pivot_table. So in case if you wrote df.pivot_table, it wouldn't work. So you got to make sure that you store your stuff in that data set, and then accordingly you just use that code, and you can find bits and pieces everywhere. One more question down there by Oscar, I guess. Can you please write your sites where we can find more scripts? I guess, guys, I mean, exact script, yeah, we could get back with some information, but a good place to start, I'd highly recommend if you want to learn basics of Python and you can quickly hop onto other use cases. Data Camp is very useful. I'm sure a lot of people know that, yeah. Like Matt is also mentioning that.
Data Camp. Okay,
Yeah,
Data Camp.
Data Camp is a really good place. You got the first chapters for free, rest it's a paid subscription, but they are very good. They've got a more of a, they've got 2-minute videos, and then you can code in live there, and they take you right from baby steps all the way to a pro. So it depends on how much you want to learn. So I really enjoyed learning on that one.
Okay, so once again, feel free to unmute anyone if they have any questions. Was there something else there, Abdul?
Hi, name is Barnaby Waits. Just a question as a person who's quite comfortable with Power BI, the jump to Python feels very intimidating. And I've had a bit of play around with some of this kind of code. But what do you think is the kind of the best place to start? So you've talked about the pivoting as being a really good use case. Is there any other use cases where it really pays dividends to try Python instead of, hitting your head against the wall with Power Query or something like
that? I'm sure you watched the first part of my demo where I tried to embed. You're talking about, yeah. So if you want to use like different visualizations that your users have not seen before. So my first demo was about getting a completely different visualization, which you can impress your business customers with, So it's a very, like I said, it was only 3 or 4 lines of code, and it's so that's what my demo was about, using less lines of code, because I know that Python can be intimidating for people who have not had a programming background. So I think it's a very, just start with like 3 or 4 lines of code which can do the job, and then it'll give you that kind of kickoff, that, oh, I can do Python.
Thanks.
And I guess to add on to that, Barnaby, so yes, pivoting is one use case where certain things query editor can't do. But the best part is if you get a hold of that language, you can do a lot of scripting. And I've done like heavy lengths of scripts. So for example, your query editor has a million steps down there on the right side because you have to change so many things. But what if you knew Python and you can just simply go and rename the columns to, capitalize, and then make sure you do the aggregation as well as the pivoting. These are mostly the data wrangling steps, which we have buttons and code behind the PBI query editor. But sometimes the script is more easier when you want to do it multiple times. And a lot of people face problems with the query editor where they skip one of the steps sometimes when they're trying to replicate tables and all. And then they land with a lot of issues. But the same thing, if you did it in code, it's just a little bit of modification here and there. So that will definitely pay off your dividend, just to answer your question.
So just while you were answering that, Abdul, I just quickly looked for some different chart types going on the theme that Marylyn said. So there's obviously a lot of different types of visualizations that you can build using these standard libraries, right? So these are 1 line, 2 lines of code. So for example, I'm not sure that there's a box plot that looks as good as that. It's available in Power BI. I'm happy to be corrected. But it looks, here's the code. So it looks pretty easy. It's just a matter of getting that mapping against your data set, I guess, Marylyn, and then off you go. So I think that's one really good reason, is just to get these visuals up and running, quickly build some new visualizations that would otherwise not be possible.
Yeah. So like there are 2 pieces to it. One, Python if you want to use Python to create new visuals, or you want to use Python to do your data manipulation in query editor. So both of them are very powerful. And what we also find is sometimes we have to wait for a new feature in Power BI just so that, I can do my certain labeling in a certain place, and I can't have this XYZ small nitty-gritty stuff. But if you knew Seaborn properly or Matplotlib properly, you could actually go and, label, color, or do whatever XYZ kind of modification you wanted within your visual, just like how Matt was showing right now. So yeah, that's a good use case too if you want to create visuals. I usually enjoy more personally the data manipulation with that.
So there's a question about Charticulator. And so Charticulator is obviously a custom visual that allows you to build your own custom visuals. Any comments on the differences? Do you know Charticulator, Marylyn, maybe? Or
no, sorry, I haven't. I've been working lately with Azure a lot and less with Power BI. So Kavi, do you know that visual?
No, I've never heard of that one. Jason, would you like to share like what Charticulator does? Then maybe we could tell you what Python could, if we could do that or not.
Hi, yeah, sure. So I actually haven't done much or really anything other than just sort of the sample videos with Charticulator, but it's basically a no-code solution for building custom visuals that the Microsoft team put together. I think partly to help overcome the fear of getting into the R and Python visuals. And the sorts of things I've seen that have been produced with Charticulator are very similar to like the violin chart. So I was just wondering whether Python's got a larger flexibility perhaps than what Charticulator's currently got available. Again, as I said, I haven't done really anything from a production aspect with Charticulator, so I don't know what extent it can actually get to. But
I might be able to add just a little bit of context here. So Charticulator is a custom visual in the same way that I guess Python is it's actually a standard visual now. But Python is calling these rendering libraries, right? So someone has written the underlying library, which is the code. So that's the abstraction that Marylyn referred to. So some smart person did all the hard work, and you pass the parameters and the library will render on the screen for you. Whereas Charticulator is more of it's almost like a widget-based custom visual, where the user can build their own visualization objects and make them display in certain ways. So I think Charticulator is more like, as Jason said, a low-code version of what the Python library is doing under the hood. That would be my interpretation, but if someone has a different or better insight than that, happy to hear it.
Well, I'm actually at the end of my presentation, and people are still associating the word fear with Python. Like, I try to make it as best, as user friendly as possible, because I use like 3 or 4 lines of code. I was hoping that at the end of the presentation, people would be like, "Yay, I can do Python."
I think it's pretty straightforward. All right, so there's a few other questions.
Anthony's hand up. Yeah. Anthony, would you like to go ahead?
Anthony.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've just been Googling as it's been going on. So when you publish a report, it's just going to publish a static, or a picture of whatever you've plotted.
As alternative to seeing the code, you mean, once it's in the service? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so I was just looking, there's no interactivity to any of those plots. So like if I change my filters or do anything like that, so let's just have like page level filters or something. So that won't actually, yeah.
So in both the demos where I embedded Python in Power BI and Power BI within Jupyter Notebook, both were quite interactive because I did use the filters as well.
Yeah. So that's embedding the Power BI into Jupyter Notebooks. I'm talking about just like scripting with Python within your PBIX file, which you then publish. So in that case, so I publish now to, I don't know, I always forget what it's called, but like the Power BI service. Yeah, is that just publishing the actual like image? It's not like I can apply like page level filters and that will change that image.
Yeah. It's not just the image, because see, like as in once you want to publish your report onto Power BI service, it's then Power BI service also, I'm sure in the background will interpret the Python code, right? Because today, if you look at it, Azure also has interpreters for Python code. So I'm sure once you publish it, it can do the filtering as well.
So it is live. Yep.
Okay. Because I mean, then it would like just normal deployments, like you have like a requirements to like, so like Power BI service is smart enough just to read imports and know what Python version to run, what libraries to import. I'd imagine it would just be a static.
No, it's interactive.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, because I also was under the impression that they were static. Maybe there's something new that changed that. That's good if they're interactive.
So Anthony, what happens, I guess, is, as Marylyn showed in the code there, that, you usually write data set and you import your columns, what you drag and drop in a data frame. So when you slice on that particular column, in any of your slices on the page, it automatically basically probably filters that down and then passes that as an argument to the data set, and hence it interacts with it. So you probably want to try it out and see it. I'm not 100% sure if what happens when it exactly goes to service, but I think your question was, if I use a Python visual, can I slice and dice, and will the Python visual reflect my slice and dice?
Yes, because like when you're doing it locally, you're setting your Python interpreter and you're doing all of that locally. So now if I publish it like that, you
can totally publish it to Power BI service, and it will show you your Python visual. And if it works in PBI desktop, I reckon it should work there. But there are limitations to your PBI service. It doesn't take all libraries from Python. So if you wrote some crazy script out there, then probably on PBI service it's not going to show.
I've just posted a link to the documentation which tells you which libraries are supported. So both Pandas and Matplotlib Library are both supported. So I think it's a fair point, Anthony, that if there's something obscure, then maybe it won't work. But looks like it's there.
Cool.
Okay.
I think Irfan's got a question. How many lines of rows can be processed by the Python visual as R as a limitation of 150K? I think it's the same limitation here. If you look at the documentation on PBI service, Python's got some limitation. Irfan.
I think
there was one other question from D had a question. If you publish a Power BI report in Jupyter, does the consumer of the report need a Power BI Pro license? Yes, if you definitely want to look at it, you do need a Power BI Pro license. If you're looking at it yourself, then you obviously.
Good question, but yes, there's no way around it. Marylyn, I just have another question about the Jupyter Notebook. So I missed I'm not sure whether you showed how to install it. I certainly missed when you launched it, but I'm gathering this is some sort of programming interface?
Oh, so Jupyter Notebook is very easy to launch. Like you just need to go to command prompt and just type Jupyter Notebook and it'll open up.
Okay. All right. So it installs on your machine, and then it's basically a development framework.
Yeah.
And okay.
I think there's another question. Like, is it possible to see the dataset content in parallel to Python chart?
Is it possible to see the dataset content in parallel to Python chart?
But
Yeah.
which?
Yes, I think what she's trying to ask is she wants to see the dataset in a table rather than a visual, and you can, if you want, you can actually see it rather than plotting it like a table. Is that the question, Kate? If I'm not wrong.
For which scenario is that question? Because we showed 3 scenarios, right? Like if it's
For the visualization, I would guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just like a matrix table or a normal table, I think they want to use Python to show the table.
I mean, at a minimum, you could add a matrix with the same data structure, and you should be able to see it. But I'm assuming Python has some table-based summarization visual output as well. So, and there's another question: can you create functions for reuse, or are you sort of limited to calling the libraries that have been generated under input paired?
You can create functions, but what if you want to reuse it across different PBIX files? But different PBIX files will have different column names and different data in there. So I reckon you'll always have to change your input parameters within the code, and then yes, you can use the general functions, whatever it's using it. Whatever it's so. For example, you store everything in data set, but this data set has XYZ variables, and the other PBIX has PQR variables. So that way, if everything gets stored in a data set, and data set is used to create further lines of code, then yes, you can reuse it. So that's the only bit.
So it's sort of more like a bundle of code that you would sort of functionize it by setting your parameters at the top of the code and then passing it through to your own code.
Yeah.
Sort of like reusable VBA script, if you like, for those mere mortals like me. Another question about just any ideas or any suggestions on whether Jupyter could be used for business users. So is it an IT developers tool, or are there any use cases for Jupyter workbooks for business?
So Jupyter Notebook basically can be used by anybody. It's not just because I've seen business users use it. And if we leave visualization aside and Power BI aside for some time, I was working with a business analyst who was using Jupyter Notebook to perform data validation or something like that. Just to like, as in I had built a data warehouse and that person was just validating the data. To answer that question, yes, it is possible to share a .py file. So you can't really share the notebook itself, but if you save your code in a .py file, a .py file is can be interpreted by any Python IDE. So just the way you have your .txt file, and it can be opened by Notepad and Notepad++, a .py file can be opened by any Python interpreter.
And to add on to that, Barnaby, usually, yes, you can convert it into Python file and you can read it. But if you're talking about only business users, usually what people use Jupyter Notebook is to show you a kind of code-like PowerPoint presentation. So in PowerPoint, you'd probably have like XYZ slides, right? The same way in Jupyter Notebook, what you usually have is if you wanted to show, hey, we read this data, and then next step we manipulated it, and you wanted to show the output in the next cell. And in Jupyter Notebook, you can also write comments in between, which can show up as headings. So in order to show an end-to-end process of what you've done, and usually data scientists do this when they want to show, hey, we've done the data exploration bit. Now we've done the data validation and the wrangling bit, and now we've done the whatever machine learning bit, and then data testing, and then output. So you want to show it in steps, and you can share Jupyter Notebook as PDFs as well if you want to the output of that end-to-end. And you find a lot of resources on internet where people have shared their code in the form of Jupyter Notebook with the outputs. And that's the beautiful part about Jupyter Notebook, where if you were using Spider as an IDE, or if you were using R, for example, in another language, you had to execute all lines of code and see output on a separate screen. But in Jupyter Notebook, you can type it, and the next line, you can see it in a cell. and accordingly, you can use it. So in a step-by-step way, in order to teach anyone or present anyone, especially business users, it's a great way to actually show it and use it.
So it sounds like a tool for data scientists and maybe an opportunity for an advanced business analyst who wants to do the things that you talked about, Abdul. Very good.
Yeah. And technical users, a best way to show it. If you wanted to share stuff among your technical team, then that's great. Business users, some cases, yes, you can actually make most out of it.
Yeah. Okay, any final questions from anyone? So
Matt's hand is up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think
sorry, Matt.
that's all right. I think some of my questions have been answered, or the question has been answered. But yeah, I was really struggling to understand the use case for embedding Power BI inside a Jupyter Notebook. You touched on it. Obviously, you're trying to not take it away from the Power BI service when you're trying to publish it. But I guess if organisations don't have that, then they can publish the Jupyter Notebooks or whatever is the back end that they're using to be able to display. But there's obviously all the visualizations are quite competing, like that you can generate in Python versus Power BI.
I think, Matt, the best use case for embedding Power BI report within Jupyter Notebook would be when people are using Jupyter Notebook to do machine learning, and once they have their test data and they pass that output predicted data within a visualization, and they want to basically slice and dice that visualization, and they want to use Power BI to show that bit. So that's where you can integrate your machine learning and BI together within the Jupyter Notebook, and you can share it with other users and whatsoever. So that's one use case what I can think of, where a lot of people can actually make the most of both of these tools, and it's really good to embed it within Jupyter Notebook. And then the other way around, you can use Python, and you can do stuff within Power BI report as well. So like Matt mentioned before, it's data scientists can benefit probably more from it, and technical users when they want to share stuff.
Yeah, and Matt, so this feature of embedding Power BI report into Jupyter Notebook was just launched by Microsoft last month. And I think the use cases will start developing from now on. Like, Microsoft is going to see how people are using it and how popular it is getting. So I guess it's just about time. We'll just have to wait and watch.
Okay, thanks, guys.
No worries.
All right. Well, look, I think we might call it a wrap. So thank you, Abdul and Marylyn, or Marylyn, of course, specifically, but thank you for your help at the end. Abdul, thank you to everyone for joining. Thanks, Iman, for helping organise this. It looks like we're going to be back online next month, would be my best guess. I can't see much changing here in Sydney, certainly about getting back to normal within the reactor by next month. So Iman and I will announce an update on that in the coming week or so. There was a question earlier on about the video, so I will get the video rendered and I will share directly through Meetup where to find that video once we decide where we're going to store it. So thanks again, Marylyn. Great presentation. Good job. And
thank you.
Okay, thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.